As we said earlier, there has been plenty of news in the past 24 hours about President Trump and his businesses. In fact, there are continuing questions about his pledge to separate from his businesses now that he's in the White House. William Brangham is here with more.
That federal lawsuit that was filed earlier today alleges that President Trump is violating the emoluments clause of the Constitution. That clause bars government officials from receiving certain types of gifts from foreign powers or governments. As we heard, the president called the suit totally without merit. In other developments, White House spokesman Sean Spicer said today the president had resigned from his businesses in full as he'd promised to do. There have been questions as to whether that had indeed happened, but late today several news organizations said they had received signed letters and filings showing the process has indeed begun. Jonathan O'Connell is covering all this for the Washington Post, and he joins me now. Jonathan, let's start specifically with this lawsuit. What is the argument that these plaintiffs are arguing?
Sure. What they're taking aim at is the emoluments clause of the Constitution, as you mentioned. It's an obscure clause that really no one had paid much attention to until recently. What it does is it bars the president and other federal officials from receiving benefits of any kind from foreign leaders or foreign officials. And unfortunately, there isn't a lot of case record in terms of courts really breaking that apart and explaining what that might mean, and the Supreme Court has never addressed it. So there's a wide view of opinions on what an emolument might mean, what might qualify as an emolument, and also what might qualify as a violation of the emoluments clause. People are talking about some of the businesses that Mr. Trump has that receive payments from federal officials or foreign governments, or have received interest payments from maybe foreign banks. There are foreign buyers of his condominiums. There are foreign tenants or foreign-owned tenants of his buildings. And Mr. Trump is trying to take precautions to separate himself from his businesses as much as he can, but retain ownership of them.
Help me understand what the concern is here. Is it that if I am a foreign government and I am somehow putting money into a Trump-related organization, that might somehow curry favor with the president?
Sure, yeah. The original idea was to avoid bribery from occurring and make sure that the president and other officials were focused on doing the best thing for the nation. And that core ideal is, I think, at the center of this initial lawsuit and the other lawsuits that could be to come, which is out of the concern that Mr. Trump will continue to have some allegiance to his businesses because he does still own them and he would still benefit or profit from their doing well at the same time that he is president. And he has such a wide array of businesses that he started. To think about all the various conflicts that he could have in the various parts of the federal government that he will oversee, it's going to take quite a bit of unwinding.
China is one of the examples that is often cited when we talk about this clause. China rents space in Trump Tower.
Sure.
A Chinese government bank, I know, loans money for a Trump-related project. What is it that the people who are bringing this suit want the Trump organization to do?
I think, there's a couple different motives for a suit like this. One is if you can get far enough along down the line in a lawsuit, you can get to the discovery phase, as any attorney would know. And that's when you sort of get to learn much more about what the opposing party has at stake here. And then, maybe they could unearth some of Mr. Trump's financials. Maybe they could even unearth his tax returns. Some of this might be a long shot, but there are probably a number of groups that are going to try to take a shot at this. And there's, as I mentioned, with all the businesses that he has, and you mentioned some of the Chinese interests, there's a number of opportunities and courts at which different parties could take a shot at him this way. And, for instance, he has many hotels in the United States, some of which he owns and some of which he has licensing agreements on. And if a foreign government wanted to say they're going to do him a favor and rent out the entire hotel for a weekend and give his company thousands or tens of thousands of dollars that way, there's nothing preventing them from doing that right now.
The president's lawyers and some other legal scholars have looked at this and said booking a hotel is really not the same as giving a sack full of cash to the president because the money's going to a corporation, not to the president himself.
Sure. There's a number of interpretations here. One is, from the president's lawyer you saw, If somebody's paying market rate for a hotel room, that doesn't feel like a gift to a lot of people, and maybe it would not be considered a gift under the Constitution. On the other hand, if you look at an emolument as any kind of a benefit, any kind of a payment that the president receives from a foreign entity, then even if one is paying market rate for a hotel room, that's still a benefit to him and to his company. Now, Mr. Trump has also said that he will be donating any profits from foreign clients or foreign business to the United States Treasury. But think about the difficulty of that if you own or operate a hotel company. The hotel staff would then have to distinguish between the payments that are from foreign entities or foreign guests and everybody else, and then divvy it up and send a check to the Treasury. And Mr. Trump and his attorneys have not explained any of the logistics of how that would work. Or, you know, he's also mentioned that he's closed down a number of business deals in order to insulate himself from his businesses, but he hasn't disclosed what any of those deals are either.
I mean, the president, in part to disentangle some of these things, as you have said, has said that he's going to resign from his companies. There seems to be some evidence that he's making steps to do that. I know that a lot of ethics lawyers have looked at what he has proposed to do and say it's insufficient. What do they argue the president needs to do?
I mean, the ultimate ideal from the ethics experts, and the thing that a number of presidents have done before Mr. Trump, is to put their assets into a blind trust. And a blind trust, the term gets thrown around quite a bit, but essentially it is an independently operated entity that would liquidate all of Mr. Trump's assets. Now, that's not an easy thing to do with real estate. It's not ideal to sell real estate based when your hand is forced, because you know, it's a cyclical business, and I think there's probably a reasonable way for Mr. Trump's company to retain ownership of his hotels and other properties. But if he doesn't do more than what he's doing in terms of taking himself and his ownership out of these companies, these questions are going to continue coming up. I would imagine for his entire presidency. He owns so many businesses. They are so prominent in terms of golf and hotel and products that I can't imagine this will go away if he continues to own them all.
All right, Jonathan O'Connell of The Washington Post, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Released documents today saying the president has resigned from positions in hundreds of Trump business entities. Some documents as well from a bipartisan ethics watchdog, court documents, and a conflict of interest lawsuit. Now, in a moment, we're going to speak with one of the attorneys, a Republican, taking part in the civil action. But first, our chief political correspondent, Dana Bash, has more.
My two sons, who are right here, Don and Eric, are going to be running the company.
One day before he was inaugurated, President Trump made that official, according to this signed document provided to CNN by the Trump Organization, which reads in part, "I, Donald J. Trump, hereby resign from each and every office and position," and concluding, "My resignation shall be effective immediately," dated January 19th, 2017.
Again, I don't have to do this. They're not going to discuss it with me.
It is true that most conflict of interest laws requiring federal government officials to divest from their businesses do not apply to the president. Yet a group of ethics attorneys argues President Trump still has an interest in his companies, which violates the Constitution. That group filed a lawsuit against the new president. Why isn't resigning from his companies enough?
Because he has a financial interest. I mean, and it's not even a blind trust. He has his name on these buildings. Everyone knows they're his. Everyone knows that he profits from that.
At issue, the so-called emoluments clause of the U.S. Constitution, which says no person holding any office can, quote, accept of any present, emolument, office, or title of any kind whatever from any king, prince, or foreign state.
Founders, one thing that always amazes me about the Constitution is how much prescience the founders had. They understood that it would be a real problem if elected officials had financial entanglements with foreign governments. And so they put a very strict rule into the Constitution. You cannot accept presents or payments from foreign governments.
Their argument is that when a foreign official stays in a Trump hotel or an embassy uses a Trump ballroom or rents office space in a Trump property, it may violate the Constitution. Earlier this month, Trump lawyers said any profits from foreign government payments to his hotels would be donated to the U.S. Treasury, but insisted it's not necessary.
These people are wrong. This is not what the Constitution says. Paying for a hotel room is not a gift or a present, and it has nothing to do with an office.
The reality is, this part of the Constitution has never been tested in court. It is still unclear if a federal judge will even hear this case from the plaintiff against Trump, Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, a left-leaning watchdog group. The president himself, no stranger to being sued in business, responded this way.
Without merit. Totally without merit.
Dana Bash, CNN, Washington.
Well, joining us now, someone who clearly believes there is merit to the lawsuit. He's one of the attorneys attached to the case, Richard Painter, who served as the chief ethics lawyer in the George W. Bush administration. He's currently a professor of corporate law at the University of Minnesota. Thanks so much for being with us, Richard. We just saw President Trump officially resigning from his companies. You say that's far from enough. In fact, you're part of the group of ethics lawyers suing the president in federal court. Why do you think this has merit?
Well, first of all, I want to clarify that Crew, the plaintiff in this suit, is not a left-leaning group. I wouldn't have anything to do with it if I was. If it was, I think that Americans of all political persuasions ought to be very concerned if the president is taking payments through his businesses in violation of the Constitution. And this provision of the Constitution prohibits not just presents, but emoluments. And they used a lot of Latin phrases back then. It's a word that comes from a Latin root. We don't use the same language today as much. It basically means payola, benefits from dealings with foreign governments. The president cannot accept these payments. Neither can anybody working for the United States government in a position of trust accept benefits from business dealings with foreign governments. This includes loans from the Bank of China. This includes foreign government-owned banks and other corporations renting space in office buildings, diplomats staying in the hotels, parties put on by foreign governments in the hotels. None of that is permitted. We've been talking about this for 2 months, urging the president to take action to clean the foreign government payments out of his businesses. No action has been taken other than the very, very minimal step of turning profits from hotels over to the government.
Yeah, because that's what the president's attorney did. I mean, he did address some of this earlier this month, saying the framers of the Constitution never designed the emoluments clause with the idea that paying your hotel bill in some way was making profit from a foreign state. To that, you say this goes well beyond the hotel bills.
It goes well beyond the hotel bills, and we don't even know where the financing is coming from for a lot of the Trump businesses that are listed on his financial disclosure form.
But don't you have to prove injury?
We have no idea where it's coming from.
Don't you have to prove injury of some kind for this case to move forward, and that your associates have standing as plaintiffs?
Yes, and I think we do have standing. The group, Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, has been focusing on corruption for a long time. We have spent a lot of time and money addressing the campaign finance corruption, the revolving door, the so-called Goldman Sachs goes to Washington phenomenon, lobbyists and the rest of it. And now we are confronted with this new avenue of corruption. It's one anticipated by the founders, but we have not had a serious problem with foreign government payments to U.S. government officials for a very long time. And now we have to confront it, and we have a president who is not willing to assure us even that Russia has not put Russian government money into his business enterprise. He's given us no assurances whatsoever about emoluments. And this is something we have spent a lot of time and money dealing with. We feel a judge needs to look at it now.
All right, Richard Painter, I appreciate it. We'll continue to follow it. Thanks very much. Just ahead, the huge crowds that turned out to protest.
Nora Bookbinder, Executive Director of Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, Crew, the nonprofit watchdog group behind the case, and Edward Williamson, a former State Department legal advisor. Gentlemen, it's so good to have you here, and I can't wait to hear what you have to say about this. Noah, I'm going to start with you. Your organization, as I said, filed this lawsuit saying that Donald Trump is violating the Constitution by allowing Trump hotels and other businesses to take payments from foreign governments. Here's how President Trump responded to your lawsuit.
Mr. President, reaction to the lawsuit today?
Thank you. Can you go ahead and walk out the side door, please? Thank you, guys.
Totally without merit.
Noah, what do you say to that?
Well, we think it has tremendous merit. The lawsuit, we're represented in this lawsuit by the top ethics advisor for President Obama and President Bush, the top bipartisan experts. by some of the top legal scholars, constitutional scholars in the country. These people wouldn't have brought the lawsuit. We wouldn't have brought the lawsuit if we didn't think it had significant merit. You've got a president who had an opportunity to sell his businesses, to separate himself from his businesses. He wouldn't have these problems if he had done that, but he didn't. And so you now have a situation where he is, on a day-to-day basis, accepting payments from foreign countries, which the Constitution prohibits, and which really puts you in danger of having him make decisions that benefit his business interests, that benefit these foreign countries, instead of being made in the best interest of the American people.
Ed, Senator Bernie Sanders spoke about the lawsuit on CNN earlier tonight. Listen to this.
We want a president who is going to make decisions based on the needs of the American people, not based on foreign investments and the people who own his debt. And I think this is an issue that has to be looked at very, very thoroughly, and I do have serious concerns.
Do you share his concerns, or do you agree with President Trump that the suit has no merit?
Well, let's talk about the suit. The complaint, I think, has no merit. The interpretation of the Emoluments Clause that the complaint serves up there's not a single court decision or opinion of the Office of Legal Counsel of the Justice Department that supports their interpretation. Another thing that's just interesting, just the brief comments, introductory comments that you made and that Noah Bookbinder made. The complaint also very much conflates the question of the Emoluments Clause, and Senator Sanders' comments sort of reflect this too, and the issue of the conflict of interest laws of the U.S. There is a very specific conflict of interest law, and it very specifically excludes the president and the vice president from its coverage. So I think as we go through this discussion, we need to keep in mind which it is that we're talking about. Again, if you want to talk about alternative facts, Noah Bookbinder's comment that Trump could have disposed of his assets is just not true. And his assets are tremendously complicated.
No, you want to respond?
He could not have done it.
Sure, happy to respond. What he should have done is to turn over his companies to a trustee and give the difficult job of figuring out how to dispose of them to that trustee. That kind of thing has been done. It's been done for other officials. It's a kind of thing that is doable. It would have been difficult, but it wouldn't have been his problem. It would have been the trustee's problem. Respectfully, while there are separate laws for conflicts and for these foreign payments that are addressed in the Constitution, the principle is the same. The principle is that you want the President of the United States or any American official making decisions based on what is in the best interest of the American people and of the country, not based on personal financial interests. And so the principle is the same.
Richard, you've sat by patiently. Stand by, because I want Richard to get in. We have very limited time. Richard, we're talking about the Emoluments Clause, and it hinges on this, which says that the government office holder can benefit financially from a foreign state. But earlier this month, Donald Trump's lawyer said that the Emoluments Clause doesn't apply here. Watch this, and then we'll discuss.
No one would have thought when the Constitution was written that paying your hotel bill was an emolument. Instead, it would have been thought of as a value for value exchange, not a gift, not a title, and not an emolument.
Correct me if I'm wrong. She's making a very similar claim as Ed here. Ed, are they right? Is she right? Is Ed right?
No, that's not right. And the oldest conflict of interest laws in the United States are in the Constitution, and they're focused on foreign governments. The founders were very worried about foreign governments. So worried they insisted the president be a natural-born citizen. We certainly heard a lot about that from Mr. Trump over many years. But this provision is far more important. It's the requirement that nobody holding a position of trust with the United States government can be receiving presents or emoluments. And emoluments, it comes from a Latin term, emolumentum. It refers to benefits from foreign governments. And if someone is buying and selling merchandise or leasing hotel rooms to foreign governments, that's fine, but that person cannot hold a position of trust with the United States government. And that's what the founders intended. And Mr. Trump knew this when he was running for president. Now he is President Trump. He cannot be making profits and other benefits from business transactions with foreign governments. And many of these transactions we don't even know about. It's not just hotel rooms, it's financing, bank loans from the Bank of China, loans that may be coming into all of his businesses. We don't know what the debt is on his businesses. It's not disclosed in his financial disclosure form. It could be from all over the world. And that is exactly the type of thing the founders did not want happening. They knew that European powers, other powers would want to interfere in our political system. Great Britain, France, Austria-Hungary, and Russia. Yeah. And that's what's going on right now, and we're not going to put up with it.
And I'm sure you want to respond.
I don't know where to start. I mean, it's just, I guess I would start just asking Richard, where in the complaint is there a court decision or an OLC opinion cited that supports that interpretation? And to the contrary, I think if you look at the white paper that the Trump's lawyers put together, they cite several. And you know, in addition, I mean, if you just do things such as look at the Federalist Papers, which you know, Alexander Hamilton and James Madison wrote to explain the Constitution to the people, they make a dozen or so references to emoluments, and the emoluments is used a couple of times in the Constitution, and no interpretation that they give comes close to what Richard just outlined. An emolument is essentially a payment in respect of service performed in an office.
Okay, so listen, this has never been litigated before. Am I?
Not.
That's true.
Go ahead, Richard.
No.
This has never been litigated before.
That is not the limit of emolument. That is a type of emolument. But it's not limited to an office. Holding an office in the United States at the same time as holding an office in a foreign country, that is not the emolument that they were speaking of. They are talking about benefits earned from foreign governments. So
let me, Richard, let me ask you this. So let's just say that I stay at a Trump International, the hotel in D.C., and then I pay, you know, $491 for a room. And let's say a person who is in the next room is a diplomat from maybe Bahrain or something like that, and she pays $491 for a room. Why is my hotel bill a business transaction and her hotel bill a violation of the Constitution, Richard?
Well, both are a business transaction. The point is that a person holding a position of trust with the United States government should not be making money on business transactions with foreign governments. There's too much of a potential for corruption there. The founders were very worried about that. They weren't going to say, well, you can't take bribes from foreign governments, quid pro quo. They can't prove that. They wanted to have a prophylactic provision there in the Constitution that you do not receive emoluments, benefits, the Latin term.
And you're saying not a certain kind of emolument. You mean all emoluments. Yes. All right, listen, I got to get a break in, so stand by. We'll continue to talk about this, but also we're going to discuss this. When we come right back, could this lawsuit force the president to release his tax returns? If Donald Trump ever releases his tax returns, but that's not what the polls are showing. And back with me now, Richard Painter, Noah Bookbinder, and Edwin Williamson. Gentlemen, welcome back. Noah, you know, Cruz says right up front that you plan to use this lawsuit to force President Trump to release his tax returns. Is that really what this case is all about?
It's not really what this case is all about. This case is really about ensuring that he complies with the Constitution and ensuring that he makes decisions for the right reasons. However, if we're going to be successful, if we are going to establish what foreign payments he is taking, and if a court is going to be able to make a decision and tell him he needs to stop taking those illegal payments, then we're going to have to know what they are. And right now, we don't have a comprehensive account of what Donald Trump's business interests are. A very good way to get a much more comprehensive account is going to be to look at his taxes. So that will clearly be one of the things we're going to be asking for, because otherwise we can't get where we need to go in this case. But I also did want to mention that Richard Painter and his counterpart Norm Eisen and Professor Lawrence Tribe have written up a comprehensive account of the emoluments clause, examining the law, and have found tremendous legal support for the position that we're taking. It has never been resolved by a court because we've never had a president who has put us in this position, but we're eager to get into a court and get it resolved.
What will the taxes show?
Well, among other things, the taxes will give us a lot more information about what precisely his business interests are, and where they are and how they work. We know about some of the foreign payments that he's getting. We certainly have no way of knowing whether we know about all of them or even a substantial portion of them, and his taxes can give us a whole lot more information about that.
Richard, and then I'm going to get Ed in quickly. Richard, Kellyanne Conway also said that people didn't care if Trump releases his tax returns, and we know that she's wrong about that. This is an ABC News Washington Post poll released last week. 74% say that Trump should release his tax returns, including 49% of his very own supporters.
Well, Kellyanne Conway's been talking about a lot of so-called alternative facts recently, and I think the White House better get the message very quickly that alternative facts are not going to fly with the American people. And Donald Trump promised to release the tax returns. Many, many times he promised to release the tax returns as soon as this audit was done. And I think the American people are going to hold him accountable for that promise. And that's not what this lawsuit is about. This lawsuit is about the emoluments, the unconstitutional payments to the president. The tax returns might very well tell us what those payments are. There are other ways to get that information. But the real facts are the American people were promised those tax returns, and they're entitled to them. And he ought to live up to his promises.
Ed, if the IRS is auditing President Trump's taxes, as he and his people continue to claim, they have shown no evidence to that effect, and President Trump is in charge of the IRS now. Is that a conflict?
Oh, sure. I would think that that would be a specific party, particular matter for Trump to weigh in on the IRS with respect to an audit, and he should recuse himself from anything like that. But I'm not sure I understand exactly the position here. Noah says that this suit is about the tax returns. Richard says it isn't. But I think maybe, I'd like to, if I could go back to just one provision in the complaint.
I've got 30 seconds. If you could do it then, I would appreciate it.
Okay. They make a claim that the Trump is in violation of what's referred to as the domestic emoluments clause, which basically prohibits the president from being compensated by the federal government or a state government in excess of his the set salary. And if their interpretation is correct, President Obama was in violation of it for receiving interest on Treasury securities that he owned. That's just an example of the quality of this complaint.
All right, I've got it.
No, we're not claiming that at all, and we're not claiming that with respect to foreign government bonds. Not at all. This is about business deals. This isn't about securities you buy on an open market.
Look at paragraph 50 of your complaint.
All right, I've got to go. Thank you, gentlemen.
This is about business transactions.